what came to me in that little attunement was, maybe you don't need to hear a lot about theory, because I think the concept of interaction first is such a huge and important and distinguishing FOT from other approaches that that we want to spend a lot of our time on that. But I will start by telling you the little story about this video, the theory of FOT. There are two things that I used to and still do advocate for passionately with Jean. One of them was for theory, because in the psychoanalytic world, theory is such an important part of feeling grounded and feeling oriented. And it has such a bad name in the non-psychoanalytic world. And actually, there's newly on our YouTube channel that Jim is part of the committee for that, the FOT YouTube channel, a dialogue between Greg and I about theory, because we've always argued about the importance of theory. So you can tune into that. But I wanted to save all of the wonderful things that I found in psychoanalytic theory from being the baby that's thrown out with the bathwater of archaic, one-size-fits-all, non-client-centered kinds of constructions that fit the client into the box. And I said, that's not all of theory. And so I asked Jean to do a presentation about theory. And that's what a little part of that is. No, you saw the whole thing. And then we're going to show just a little part. You saw the whole thing, and it's so rich. And I felt so good that I sort of insisted in that he did it, and that we have it. And it feels so important to me because Jean has given us so much about philosophy and so much about practice, but that whole middle range about theory, there's very little about. So I see it in levels of abstraction as philosophy that is really about how we think. It's the path of thinking. It's not the thinking itself. It's the mode. Do we think in what Jean would call the unit model of things and how they relate to each other? Or in Jean's terms, do we think of the processes that we are and the processes of relating that we come out of? And those are very different ways of thinking. Then there's the theoretical level in the middle, which is what we find there. So the philosophical level is the path, which path we take of thinking. And the theoretical level is where that leads us, what we find. And different theories, we will see the same thing in different ways and find different things. And the level of practice is the concrete level of what we do with what we find. And how do we do it, right? The actual doing of psychotherapy. And all three are different levels of abstraction of the systems of psychotherapy. Is that all? But I want to go back for a minute to these three layers, which is just like a little diagram that can help us or not help us. One of the functions of this class is to facilitate all of us being confident enough to take authority, because we need all of the voices. We need all of the thinking. Every person has a very particular take on the world that nobody else has, and we need that. And we need to cultivate the confidence, as maybe especially in women, maybe especially in women who haven't had people cheering for them, and recognizing them. But we need all of it. We need every voice in this class. So, I treasure everybody's way of thinking, not just the people who are the good kids that agree with me, but the digested, the process of digesting ideas that help us, and then forming our own. But I want to use this little conversation to segue into the next part, which is how this video came to be. The video came to be because I insisted, and we all gather around my living room. But then I think it was a couple of years later, the Focusing Institute asked me Jean called me up. Jean called me up and asked me to help with fundraising. So they were needing money. And I thought, my God, that's not me. That I don't do that. I know nothing about finance. And I said no, and I hung up. And then this idea came to me full blown of using this video of the theory of focusing oriented therapy to bring everybody together in the world and have each community have a showing of the video in translation and have discussions, and people would contribute money when they would come to these things. And it was wonderful. And you can find all of that on YouTube if you have the time to watch it. But we have scenes from many different communities around. I think we have Stephen from Brazil, right? And what people made of these theoretical points. And one of the people in New York that gave a talk was Janet Funder. And I just loved her talk, and many people have loved it. And it was very tragic that she died before she could really put her thinking out in the world very much. She's a wonderful teacher. And we're going to watch a little clip of hers as a way of looking at how people have digested this material. Let's go right into this first point about interaction first. Authority of saying your own unique way of thinking and putting things together can be evocative. And that's what you're talking about when you have a feeling of something, but you've never been able to put it into words. and then somebody says, some theoretician says it in their way, and you say, oh, that's like what I was, it's not exactly, it's like what I was trying to say. I remember in my youth, everybody was reading the book Drama of the Gifted Child. And did any of you read that book? Raise your hands if you read that book. Wow, she really made an impact, didn't she? Imagine if she was afraid to take the authority to write that book, and she said, oh, who am I to say? But that has influenced generations of people who sort of given people a lens of seeing very, very early accommodation in a different way that they wouldn't notice. Theory is also sort of like a consciousness raising. So I loved what you said. I also wanted to say that in the early 70s, the people that I hung out with would say, as a motto, question authority. And I love that too. Take authority and question authority. That the authority to and the confidence, the incredible confidence to say, you have within you this carrying forward energy, this life force, and trust that. And I will help you trust that, as Jean helped me to argue with him. Trust the process in you and the philosophy that makes room for the process in the individual to be paramount, to come first. So just to summarize very briefly the levels of interaction first, which is my next point. The philosophical level, as you're saying, Natty, and you also, Mariana, is a way of thinking about life as process rather than as things. And we can say that, but it's very, very hard to think that way. And it takes years to sort of find your way into thinking that way, although some people may have it naturally. Most of us in the West have more thingifying, making everything things. This thing, the client is a thing that's a borderline or a obsessive compulsive, and the therapist is the thing that has early trauma, and the way they interact is like that. But there are these things, and to think about this process and how that makes a system, that's really a very different way of thinking. In my schema there of philosophy, theory, and practice, that's a theoretical question, right? How do, where does authority as a therapist come in? And it references this philosophy of what is the interaction gonna, how is that gonna make an interaction that will make things grow better? And then the clinical practice issue of how can I take my authority with the client and at the same time have give the client the space to have their own authority, encourage them to have their own authority. That's a very big question, maybe one of the biggest clinical questions, right? To be able to take the authority to say how I see things, but then right away, and Jean says it should be in the same sentence, to say, but how is that for you? So I may take authority to say something that I don't know about at all. Like, I don't think, I said to a suicidal client, I really don't think that that killing yourself is going to help things for anybody, for the world, or for you. I think that life has something to get from you and to give to you, or something like that. Now, I'm taking authority to say something I mean, who am I to say that? But if I say that with my full conviction, it has a very different impact and makes a different interaction. And then I can say, but how is it for me to say that? Who am I to say that to you? And so I can have both the conviction and also the humility and the what is it that Donna Orange calls it? Fallibilism. She calls it a theory of fallibilism, that we're fallible. For those of you who don't speak English as a first language, like it's we're all prone to making mistakes. So you can't take what I say as the last word. So this idea of how do we look at this big concept of thinking in terms of processes and see the world like we all have this authority, as Natty pointed out, to find our own truth, and that's important to the world, that truth. And the practice of how do we implement that in therapy, and we're going to be talking about that after we see the little clip, and also I'll be sharing some points with you after we see the clip about how we do that in practice. How do we, what difference does it make? Philosophy and theory have to make a difference in our sessions. Jean says in the video that we know all of this, but that theory explains it. And I think theory does explain things, but I think even more deeply, theory orients us.
The orient is a term for the
And as it orients us, it evokes different ways of conceptualizing, different ways of being. I'm thinking of Greg now, because Greg says there has to be something that there has to be an in-between step of just being in the not knowing before we have the step of finding a theoretical grounding. So that sounds good to me. That's in the pause. Okay, let's see the video, the little video clip about interaction first. Does anybody have a comment before we do that?
The first point I want to make has a name, and the name of it is interaction is first. Interaction first. So what does that mean? I'll come back to it. The theoretical question is, why does therapy work when it works? And That's the question. Now look what I do. First, I get very specific about how I would like that question to go before I try to answer it. So how I would like it to go is, why would it help anybody to say, to talk about, to express their trouble? And this is, of course, what the person who doesn't know anything about therapy would ask you. You know, yeah, well, whenever I get into those things, I just feel bad. So I go and I pay you to tell you all these things, and that's just going to make me feel bad, isn't it? And the usual answer to that would be, you're a doctor, you're a wise guy, you're going to tell me some solutions that I can't think of. And we all know that isn't quite true, right? So the question is, if the therapist or the listener, whoever that might be, is not going to give answers to the person's problems, because we don't really know any answers, what is going on such that it sometimes helps to do this, right? It's probably the first question you ever thought of. It can't be a question that you haven't thought about. You know, this person's going to come, they're going to tell me all their troubles, they're going to cry, they're going to complain, they're going to be stuck, and then they're going to say, well, doctor, what do I do? And then I'm not going to know what to do, and there isn't anybody who's ever practiced who hasn't thought about that. And the question theoretically is, well, what is supposed to work here? What is supposed to happen such that this paradox works, such that going into and feeling all over again all these bad things will make you better? What is that? What happens there? Theoretically, my answer, don't forget all theories are sometimes wrong, my answer is that a human being is not a box full of content, whether you call them experiences or feelings or dynamic circuits or whatever, however you want to think about what I call the content. A human being is not the content. A human being is interaction. And notice that I'm violating the grammar by saying that. I'm supposed to say a human being is in interaction, because the word interaction is so structured grammatically that there's supposed to be an A and then a B and then they interact. And instead of that, I'm saying something strange. I'm saying, no, I think we are interactions. I think living bodies are interactions with the air and the ground and the food and other species members. I think we are interactions. And from that point of view, if you look at a person, like if you're looking at me, you can see that I'm interaction, right? I've got these eyes and these hands and these feet on the ground and these sexual organs and this inhaling, exhaling, and this sweating out and taking in. You see it? I am interaction. And not just on the physical level. I'm interaction with other people. 9 months with my mother before I was even born. And then everybody else. The people in my so-called head, which is really further down than just my head. All those people from the past and my present life and you people here. And then I am also a special kind of interaction with myself. So while I'm talking, that's going on more below. But when I stop, right away I talk to myself. I say, do you think you said it? Do you think that made sense to them? Do they look like they're, you know? So that too is interaction.
Okay. So I'd love to hear, your response to that, your feeling about that, and anything that you might have about how that changes the way we do therapy. So when we think of therapy not as something I'm giving to somebody else, and if they're a good client, they take what I'm giving and are grateful for it. And if they're a problematic client, they reject what I'm giving. Instead of thinking of it that way, if we think of therapy as an interaction, a dance, it really has a very different flavor. And the dance very often is asymmetrical, where the therapist is the big one in the dance, and the client is allowed to be their little one, the raw one, the unprocessed one. It's not always that configuration. Sometimes the dances are very symmetrical. But I have the memory of when I was a young woman, having gone to a strict fundamentalist school. I didn't know how to dance, and I felt like, oh, to have a boyfriend, I have to learn how to dance. And I went to Arthur Murray's, which was this dance class, and knew nothing about dancing because it had been forbidden. And so this man who was assigned to me as the dance teacher just put his arms around me and told me how to put my hands on him and just guided me. It was just a wonderful experience. I felt so held and safe, and I had been so intimidated by, I'll step on everybody's feet, which I did. But with this guy, he either knew how to keep his feet out from under mine or didn't mind my stepping on his feet. And I've often thought of a therapist as being a good dance partner, especially for people who've been hurt or people who haven't learned to dance, but also for anybody, right? To be that good dance partner. It makes such a difference, this concept, in what you're thinking about in therapy, because you're always thinking about things. Are you thinking about what's the problem and how can I help to solve it? I think we all think that, even though we don't want to think that. I have a client that's always sort of yelling at me, "You're trying to fix it again. You're not trying to make me feel better." And then I have to look and see that whether that's true or not. But when we're thinking in terms of interaction, first we think, well, how are we being together? What's the atmosphere here? What are we trying to say or do? What's this moment hold? What are we afraid of saying or doing or being? What are we enjoying? So it's these we kinds of questions in our mind. If you're a dance partner, some of the interactions of the dance might be painful. You might get dropped or drop the other person. You might get hurt. But that's the two of you together. So it's that us thinking we're having a difficult interaction, and then being able to name it can be very helpful. To say, oh, we're dancing around this, or we're I always love what Jean said, we're like this right now, and to name the difficulty of this, we're trying to find our way, but we're really lost, or we're really kind of mad at each other right now, or it seems. Do you feel that? Something like that. Does that it's very hard to leave an interaction, and what's happening inside is more important. Sometimes you, as you can leave an interaction inside, and then you can be in the interaction with the person. And that's particularly helpful in therapy, where you don't want to leave the client, but you want to leave the interaction. I always say you can't change the person, but you can change the dynamic. You can change the dance, and that's something that you might not be able to do with the person. I also want to say that the idea of giving someone space, we don't give enough credence to that it's a gift. To give someone space is something we're giving. We're not just abandoning the person. I mean, we might be abandoning the person, but that's not always the case. The case may be, this is too hot to handle. That it can be shown that way, rather than in an angry, I'm not going to talk to you way, which of course is part of interactions too, to say that. Yeah, that's a big question, right? Of where we say stop, or what stop is, or what spirit it's in, and how we do it, and all of that. I was picturing Stephen in therapy, the client saying, well, I'm the client. I can jump up and down on your foot and call it anything I want to call it. And of course, you can't tell the client what they can call something, but you could say, well, I'm not going to leave my foot there. I'm picking up my foot so that it's wonderful when we can take the authority to make the interaction. I mean, that's what Jean says our main job is, to make the interaction better. And we have the authority to do that. Of course, we can't always use it, because we're triggered, and then we're in our little child place, feeling helpless and feeling enraged and feeling whatever. But then it's about, finding our way back to the place where we find ourselves again. And that's such an important part of it, right? Is that we're seeing beyond the I am hurt, my foot is stepped on. Seeing beyond that to the interaction of this person has learned, experiences that's the only way, to relate in this kind of circumstance to this kind of person. And what am I bringing? Maybe I'm bringing a very sensitive feet to the interaction. And that question of what am I contributing here? How are we together making this? And many times people will say, well, there's objective countertransference. Anybody would have trouble with this client, right? This client does this to everybody in their lives. So therefore, it's the client doing it to me. Have you heard that? Or is that more in the psychoanalytic world? I've certainly certainly heard that a lot.
Yeah, sure.
And what would we say to that? You know, this client does this to everybody. Of course, it's objective. Nobody could do any better with this person. The dance is what the psychoanalytic world would call the third. There's this, and that's the, you know, the polarization can come there of this thing and this thing. But the third is the more of all of that. It's something that transcends the thingifying of this and this. And the music is a wonderful, I never thought of that. That's great. And the music is something you're making together, you're jamming. It's not just that the music appears. From Gene's point of view, I don't like that he said the word better, because I don't think things are linear like better and worse. But he meant more alive, more fully ourselves, that kind of better. The interaction, we can really feel when the interaction comes to life. We can really feel when the energy is different. And it might be when we're talking about something that's very depressing or something that's enraging or whatever. I want to be able to play you the clip from Janet, and I have to tell you a couple of other things before I do that. But let me think back. What do I have to tell you? I have to tell you that on the simplest level that I like simple levels, concrete levels. Interaction first means that your way of interacting together is the most important thing. In a group, in anything. The way of interacting, not the content, is the most important thing. Gene, it's interesting because we're usually talking about an issue, right? And then it's kind of ironic that we're talking about an issue, but the really important thing is the way we're talking about it, the interaction, not the issue will be the fruit of that interaction. Gene had a phrase that I think I've described before, but it's a beautiful one. He said, it's not what we're saying in therapy, it's the doing and the saying. It's what we're doing. So I might be, I'll give you an example, and I have to make it quick because I want to get to Janet. But the example is of a client who was feeling enraged and despairing because one of her students quit her class because she had a moment of silence at the end just to hold the conflict with Israel and Gaza. And the student was very offended by this and said, you know, I don't come to this class to learn about that. I come to, you know, to learn about the content of the class. And it really brought me down. And I'm quitting. And my client was so outraged and saying, you know, these people who are so entitled and they want me to do just what they want me to do, and I gave a lot of time to this person, and many upsets. And I was thinking to myself, because she is also knows my work and learns it. Oh, if she knew listening and could listen to guy and say, what was it that brought you down all day about this? That would change the interaction. But I didn't say it. I that's not going to be a good way to go, to tell her what to do. But in order to help myself not to do that, I did the opposite. And I said, what would you want to say to this guy if he were right here? You know, and you could say anything you wanted. And she said, oh, you spoiled brat, blah, 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 and sort of got it out of her system. And then I asked her how she felt, and she said, well, it didn't really change it. It still felt all clogged up inside her. And she said, I felt so dismissed. And when she said that, it was like I really got something different. And then I was able in myself, not just what I was saying, but really in myself, to be in a listening mode. And what happened then? There was another. She said, this was a very important part. She said, I know you're going to say I should be on its side. And I can't be on its side. I think this guy is off the wall, and I think it was very unfair that he just quit. And I said, oh, and this was that moment where I was doing the thing that Jean does about, that's, you know, that, oh, that's the dance. She feels I'm criticizing her, and I was in my mind. So it didn't matter what I was saying. I was in my mind thinking, oh, she should learn listening. And I said, you don't feel even really like you can be yourself with me. I'm going to criticize you. And she said, yes, it's I give so much. And I said, oh, I know, your whole soul is in this class. And she said, it's like when I was a kid with my mother, who, you know, I would do so much for the family, and they didn't see it at all. They didn't acknowledge it because my values were so different than theirs. And I never did say, the part about the listening. And I didn't say that I had been thinking that, because it just wasn't the right timing for that. Although, you know, I certainly would say that if that comes up. But that was such an example for me about it's what we're doing. It's not the saying. Because I was saying, you know, what would you say to him? But what I was doing inside myself was saying, you really need blah, 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 and you should do this. So I was also in my mind telling her how to be.
Many years of immersion in focusing practice and experience and teaching focusing and studying focusing and studying the philosophy and theory all together has really brought a major shift in my experience of being a therapist. And thinking about this, what I would say today, I thought in my family, as the first child, I was a listener, pretty much a professional listener. I learned that this solved a lot of problems, to be a professional listener. And then I became a very professional listener by becoming a therapist. And then I somehow was still trapped in that legacy, and there was not a feeling of being free as a person. Then I became more immersed in studying psychoanalysis and the interpersonal dimensions and the interactive dimensions. But the particular involvement that I found myself in, I guess existential psychoanalysis, was with someone poetic, responsive, wonderful. However, it veered to the opposite extreme of too penetrating, at times pathologizing and interaction. So I love the liveliness of interaction, more interacting, but it wasn't right either. It was kind of an opposite. Focusing oriented therapy has given me a way to be a living, breathing person as I'm listening, and a way to be actively responsive in all different ways, of course, different moments, different clients. Whether I'm being silent or actively speaking, to feel I'm a person there with another person. And now to think we are one interaction is even better. We are living an interaction. So I wanted to speak to one of the things, I don't know, it's in this transcript, I think it was probably in the video too, where he said, the interaction is so much more than the two individual participants' perceptions of it. And this is an important philosophical point. He has a philosophy paper called The Primacy of the Body, Not the Primacy of Perception, which is an answer to Merleau-Ponty's The Primacy of Perception, which is beautiful. However, Jean carries philosophy forward by speaking about the knowing that we have that's beyond what we know through hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting, the five senses. We know in a bodily way, in a whole bodily way. And he coined the phrase the plant body, which I haven't heard any other philosopher use. We can all think of having animal bodies. We're humans, we have all the richness of animal bodies. We also have plant bodies. Plants live and know how to use sunlight and water without having eyes and ears, without having perceptions, what he calls the 5 peepholes of perception. They're not gathering information in through perception. They know with their whole bodies how to use sunlight and water. So this is one example of a way in which Jean's philosophy has nurtured me in a very deep, conceptual way in the intimacy of interaction in a therapy session. I really have come to trust so deeply in this knowing beyond what I can think, and trusting the sensing, that was so beautifully expressed in these case examples, to sense in this deep way. And in one moment there in the DVD, when Jean was talking about even when he's doing focusing alone, what gets him out of a self-deprecatory attitude is pausing and waiting for something fresh to come. And learning, practicing that slowing down, that pausing, waiting for something fresh to come. It's just so beautiful, it's so relaxing to trust that deeply. And then this pausing gets built into therapy, the pausing for what's not yet known. And I have a client now who always inquires into, well, what are you thinking about what I just said? What do you feel about what I just said? Do you have anything like that going on with you? Have you ever had that? So I've had years of preparation now to be able, years of building up to this kind of person who wants this intense back and forth in the moment. And I can say, well, something just came. This is what came as I listened to you. And just see if this resonates. That's a question I can ask. I'll say it, but I would like you to just see if it's useful to you or if it resonates. And she'll say, yes, oh God, what a relief. Or, well, let me see, there's a pausing, there's a way in which any phenomenon opens out into what he calls the implicit intricacy, because we need complex terms to make people ask, what is that? Uh, I also like this word knack. Being immersed in focusing experience, one develops the knack of letting things come by surprise freshly, sometimes saying them out loud, sometimes saying better not, but trusting that something is being evoked, perhaps that's useful to the other person. And this is, for me, being a person without self-disclosure. It's not about self-disclosure. It's about being a person. I can be, I'm a person with a person instead of a listening pattern. Okay, that's it. One more minute? Let me just see in my little crib sheet if there's any, oh yes. This idea that life carries forward, and when there's something stuck, there's still simultaneously a wanting to carry forward. There's an implying, a wanting, but the right next step just hasn't occurred or come or arisen or formed. This really is, for me as a therapist, a carrying forward beyond all the categories, diagnostic categories, although ways of thinking about things can be useful. All the various conflicting ways of thinking about things are very enlivening. But over time, that deepening trust that there is a wanting to carry forward. Yeah. Life, it's a different view, it's a special view of life that I have come to adopt. As I adopt that point of view about the universe, about life, something in me relaxes. And I'll just say that, okay, that's it. All right, one last thing. And I want to say that all the little, because of this DVD and the talk, I was carried forward. I was aware that all my interactions with each one of you in micro moments today, saying hello in various ways to people, and our interactions carried me forward into feeling a little more relaxed and definitely more connected. And it's so good. Thank you for carrying me forward.
Seeing Janet makes me smile. I think that I hope that Janet wouldn't mind my saying this. I don't think she would. That years earlier, before she was introduced to focusing, that the client who was demanding a lot of immediate back and forth would have been intimidating for her, and the dance would have been very different. She might have said, well, this is about you, and I want you to tell me what you think about it. I don't know that she would have done that, but that when we think of it as a dance, it helps us to really also see how we need to stretch and grow to be able to dance with different people. I was struck by Janet saying that her analysis, her psychoanalysis, she felt too penetrated and pathologized, and then focusing was this sort of antidote to that. Of course, we all have to be ourselves, and we all have different energies, different personalities, different ways of being. But we can also sort of develop the ways of other people. So I have an inner Janet. I could say, oh, I'm gonna be like Janet right now if I feel sort of scattered or something like that, and then I could just take that on. My last point here is just something a little bit more concrete. Jean and I talked about, as you know from other classes, the relational stuff and how it manifests in therapy a lot. And my wanting to carry forward his ideas about interaction first in terms of really spelling out how the interaction brings out the people rather than only the people making the interaction. And so he wrote me up an email that I asked Jim to put on the resource page. I'll also send it to you, where we were talking about these three different levels of interaction first. And so it has what he said, and then it has in bold what I said, to contribute. When I was reading it again this morning, I thought that's funny that I put mine in bold. You know, I wanted him to listen to me, but it was also to share with other people. So I'm going to ask Katerina if you have that on hand, just to read what he said and then what I said about actual things that one could say or do in a therapy session that prioritizes the relational.
When everything is smooth, this kind of relating is a special move. Really, 3 moves. 1. Therapists ask themselves what is implicitly going on in the relationship. What is implicitly going on in the relationship? 2. Then we can ask inside for phrases to speak from that. One possibility after another can come until one feels okay to say or ask. It need not turn out to be right because 3. We will be corrected by a fresh relational expression from the client. Just the sort of thing we like to have happen.
Notice that he asks himself, which is a very good starting place, well, what's going on here? Is the client trying to convince me that it's better if he kills himself? Am I trying to convince the client to do this or that in her life? Or is there a power struggle or something going on? Are we avoiding something? Are we whatever it is? So he feels inside what it is, and then finds a way of bringing it up, like to say, you know, we're like this right now, some way, a brief way. And he was very good at that, not taking up a lot of space, giving a whole thing that would drown the client in his thoughts, but finding a way of saying it. And then wanting the client to say, well, no, it's more like blah, blah, blah. Or, oh, yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing that up. In my example with my client who was upset with the student, if there had been a space for that would be where that would fit, I might have said, you know, how is it feeling to tell me about it? And then that would have given her permission to say, you know, I think you're going to convince me to do it a different way, to feel a different way. So let's read my little things that one could say, and then we'll have a couple of minutes to talk about it.
Your addition. How is it to talk about that here? These are in the chat as well if you don't need to write them down. Does that happen with me? What needs to happen with us here to make that different? What is the feeling of our being together right now?
I don't exactly like the way I said some of those things because I wrote it years ago. But you sort of get the point of finding a way of asking into the immediacy of the interaction in the session. Do you have anything to add to that? Or subtract from it, or do anything else?
Maybe how much time do you need? A few minutes, hours, days, a week? So the client or the student has a choice whether to respond right away or reflect and come back.
Well, how much time do you need is a you question. How could we make that an us question? This is all about making an us, right? We don't have to make the us. The us is there, but we're making it in the conversation.
Yeah. What kind of time will we give? Will we give a few minutes? Or?
Yeah, maybe like, is this something to flag up now and we come back to, or does this need our attention right now? Or something like that. I'm imagining when you say that, Katerina, that maybe the client feels pressured about time and needs more time than I have to give. So in that case, I might say, I have a feeling that more time is needed. And this is just a little snitch, right? How is that for you? So I would be saying something that comes to me about our immediate interaction, but then handing it over to the client. The client might say, yeah, you're always so busy, and then I don't even get to finish my story, and then the bell rings, and and then we have what's happening between us. And I wonder if the client asks me, let's just play with Katerina's example. The client says, you're always so busy, and then the bell rings and I don't have time. And then I will usually start with a reflection, and then that gives me time to take in what the client is feeling. But then what comes to me, so I would say, you feel so rushed, and it seems like my life is rushed, and there isn't adequate time for you. So that's the reflection place. And let's say the client says, yeah, I asked you to give me 2 times a week therapy, and you said you don't have time. So then I'm going to sense into myself and say, well, yeah, you know, there is a rushed quality to my time, and I don't like that either. We're up against that, and both of us are wanting a more spacious time together to let things unfold, I might say. Or I might say, I don't feel particularly rushed, but I certainly see how you would feel rushed here with 50 minutes and my starting the next session, in 10 minutes after that, or whatever it is. But I think that there's all these taboos about, and there are taboos, and there are also minefields. If you say something that could be hurtful, if you're only feeling into your own experience, you might say something that's hurtful. But if you're sensing into the us, it's not only how I feel or how the person feels, but what we're experiencing together. That I think there's less, it's less problematic. Although many times what we're feeling is really needed. That's the where the rubber meets the road as a focusing oriented therapist, right? We believe, we trust, our faith is that something always comes, but what if it doesn't? Well, then that's a something, right? Nothing comes to me right now. I'm going to give this a lot of thought and see, right?